Hi everyone, welcome. I'm down here in my wormery and it's been some time since I've been able to come down here in short sleeves to work on my worm bins. It's been really chilly, so I've usually been getting dressed up. So the only other thing that I want to put on before we get working here is my glove. And what I'm working on are the yellow buckets that you see right behind me. These yellow buckets, they've been in service now for 54 days. And they've got European nightcrawlers in them. They got last fed 14 days ago, 2 weeks ago, and they got cantaloupe rinds, and at that time we needed to put a good amount of water into the system too. The material was a bit dry. They're pretty young bins. They've only been fed a few times. They're still made up primarily of paper, you know. So in time, the paper will get consumed, we'll get more castings in there, and the system will be able to better hold on to its own moisture. But in the beginning, it helps to supplement. So 14 days ago, I don't know if those cantaloupe rinds that we gave them 14 days ago are going to show many signs of leftovers. They probably will, because even then we saw some that had been put in there 3 weeks prior to then. There were still leftovers. And even in addition to the cantaloupe rinds, there's also an apple in there, which we've been helping. Last week we peeled all of its peels off. Now it's just like a naked apple peeled. But it's still whole, you know, and each of the systems got one, so I'm curious to see how those are coming along. So let's get the buckets up onto the bench and take a look at how they're coming along. We're going to do these in order. We're going to start here with bucket number 1. I see a little flying insect down in here. Once in a while I see an insect or two flying in and out of my systems, and I mean, knock on wood, I've never seen it get into really too dire of a situation. So this was indicating to us where we fed. I've been kind of doing a little bit of a back and forth pattern here. So this is where we put the cantaloupe last time, and opposite of that is where the apple is from the previous feeding. And then going back to the previous feeding, there was even more cantaloupe in here. So there might be some 2-week-old cantaloupe in here, as well as maybe some 4-week-old cantaloupe in here. So let's just do a little bit of excavation here. The stuff on the surface is a bit dry, but like we saw last time, you don't have to go very deep. You pull back an inch or two, and then the stuff down here has already got a nice moisture level to it. Down here where the food was added last, definitely more moisture. I see parts of the feeding they got last time. I can also see some of the grit I sprinkled in here, the pulverized eggshell sort of powder consistency. So they've really stripped this, or you know what, it's just me peeling it off. You could probably see a piece of that melon right there, which is still part of this cantaloupe. So let's not detach it. Let's keep it attached. I guess what's on there might be coffee, but there was just this little piece of melon attached to this rind, but really not much at all. Seems like they came up from below and stripped it clean. I thought that I had added actually 2 pieces like that to each system. So I thought there'd be another one. I could just be misremembering. I think I'm seeing a lot more worms down here underneath the feeding area than we've seen in the past. So this handful had a bunch of them in it. And even the little bit that fell back down into the hole had a whole lot of them in there. I did apply a good bit of water last time. I was just spraying and spraying and spraying. I bet you I might have even created a little bit of a puddle at the bottom of this thing. And that might be the reason they're all over here. It might not be so much the melon. I'm just really going right to the bottom at this point to see what we can find as far as worms go. Just curious, you know, because we've kind of gotten that sense each time we've come in here that the worms are like evading us somehow. I mean, I kind of know that they're in here. They've got to be, you know. There's always signs of the work that they're doing. Yeah. So there's not going to be a whole lot left if that's all they're leaving behind from the last feeding. As far as leftovers go, that one piece of cantaloupe rind with a little bit of melon sticking to it still, and maybe a little bit of coffee sticking to it. They've done a great job. 2 weeks. I really didn't know what to expect coming in here. And I haven't sprayed any water yet because everything on this side, at least, where this feeding was last applied, feels really nice and damp and comfortable. I mean, admittedly, I just blended in a little bit of dry stuff. So maybe we'll apply some water, especially to this dry stuff that I've just piled up here. This will kind of end up being top covering, or will help fill in the feeding area with that stuff. But down in here is where we'll probably find some leftovers of the apple. Or not? Would that be possible? To me, it always seems like apples take quite some time in the worm bins. And last time we came in here, the apple had been in here for weeks, and it was still pretty much intact. It was entirely whole. And the only thing we did was take off its peel. But maybe they took... Wow, okay. Not what I was expecting in here. Alright, it seems like our feeding is pretty timely, because they're actually doing a lot better in here than I was thinking. I've been a little bit skeptical about the capability of these buckets, but it does seem like they're making mincemeat out of pretty much anything I give them, and in a pretty reasonable amount of time as well. So I've definitely created a nice big hole down here. And I've got my pre-made bedding. I'd like to sprinkle a little bit more in here. That was the one thing I've been wanting to do in this system, and all three of these systems, is to continuously expand the space in the system so that whatever worms there are, they feel quite comfortable in propagating their numbers and breeding and mating and filling in the space with babies. So that's kind of my aim with these buckets here. Okay, it's opportune. Even though my pre-made bedding does have some moisture content to it, I like to dampen it considerably. And there was a whole bunch of stuff up here too that was quite dry too, so why not dampen some of that? Or you know what, it'll get a better dampening as we drop it back in there to cover up the food, as lots of my feedings do. This one is going to include coffee as well. So we're feeding 3 systems. I've got 2 filters full of coffee, so we'll hang on to what's left of this one here, share it with the next one that we feed. So here we've got some cooked cabbage, Savoy cabbage, some stuff that's left over from a meal that I prepared yesterday and took over to my mom's to bake it and eat it. Turned out pretty darn good, if I do say so myself. Let's see if we can mix in this coffee with the underlying bedding that we sprinkled in the beginning. That might help a bit. And like I said earlier, generous with the bedding is my theme lately. So let's see. As long as they did such a terrific job on apple last time, why don't we give them a couple more? Those will probably still be there as leftovers next time, but who knows? Considering what they did with the apple they got last time, they've certainly done away with it nicely. So now some of the stuff we pulled out of the very bottom of the hole here has got some good moisture content to it. I'm pretty sure we eventually get to some drier stuff too over here, right? Let's get that drier stuff down in the hole. Stuff's just been sitting there dry. It's not gotten any attention. We're going to help it along too. Give it a little bit of dampness. Spray in a little bit of water for them. Man, I'm surprised about that apple. Curious to see what we're going to see in the other 2 systems. Alright. Going pretty generous on the water because we did submerge some dry materials into here, and those foods that we gave them don't seem like they're going to shed a lot of moisture in the process of breaking down. They might a little bit, but I could certainly see this system benefiting from the addition of a little bit of moisture. I was able to rinse off my glove at the same time too. Alright, this looks pretty good. Let's pack it up. We're going to use this coffee filter to show ourselves where we fed, which was this side. Cantaloupe versus apple bin, right? Interesting. It's not even just this bin, it's all 3 systems getting fed pretty much identically, so we can kind of track the progress of all 3 with one another. So let's get the second bucket out here and see how that one's coming along. Alright. Tell you, if I didn't specify which bin we were working on, you wouldn't know, because they look quite identical. There's not a lot of difference here. Oh, except on this one. There was the number 2 scribbled onto this piece of cardboard. And it might just be a curly mark. It might not even be the number 2, but it's a little cheat for ourselves. Sometimes we might even bump into this piece of paper that had the number scribbled onto it as well. Each system started out with a piece of paper that had the system number scribbled on it. So we'll do the same here. We'll just take a quick peek at how the cantaloupe they got last time has progressed. Make sure the area looks okay as far as moisture is concerned. Add some if we feel we need to. Here too I see little scraps of cantaloupe rind. I think we did find leftovers from the previous feeding, but those were placed under the fresh pieces. So the fresh pieces are what would have been on top. And pretty much the same thing here, you know. That's understandable though, because this material that's on the very outside of the cantaloupe melon is a little bit tougher than the inside juicy fruit portion of it. So the fact that they're still working on it, it makes sense, as well as this banana stem. I remember seeing that during one of our previous check-ins. But it is kind of nice to be able to see a few worms down in the material as we explore. Perhaps it's because they are finally starting to darken the contents of this bin with their castings. And they do seem to be doing a nice job of it. Last time I don't think we were quite at this stage yet. I think it was still primarily just like a bedding only sort of a setup. So I'm really curious. Let's start covering up here. Make our way to the spot where the apple was still a leftover from the week, not even the week prior, from 2 weeks prior to that. So 2 weeks was the cantaloupes, another 2 weeks going back was the apple. And it would have been right here, right where the feedings have been getting applied. And there's certainly like a lot of moisture here, a lot of dampness and castings. And I think I smell a little bit of like essence of apple in a way. But nothing that I'm coming across here appears to be leftover apple. I mean, there is something here, you know. I don't know what it is. Perhaps some little fibrous fragment left over, but geez. Let's give them some more. They're doing a great job. Alright. Very nice. I'm really glad to see the action in these bins starting to take off. Somehow I had this weird feeling like it's just so slow to start. But I believe that this check-in is the first indicator that things are going to pick up nicely in here. Part of the reason I want to give them a whole lot of room to roam in. Here we go. So what we did last time to help was we peeled off the entire apple peel. Almost like as a single shot in some cases. The whole thing slipped right off as a single piece of material. And right there is a piece of it. And, you know, not all the bins didn't come off as a single piece of material in every bin, but in some of them it did. It slipped right off. A little bit of bedding, a little bit of coffee, and you know what? This one's already empty, so let's leave the filter here for them. But we'll also tap into the next filter. It's got a little bit more in it. Ooh, okay. This filter just kind of opened up on its own and dumped out almost all of its contents, so let's preserve a little for the last bin. I just don't want it spilling all over the place. Here's a little bit more of that cooked Savoy cabbage. And when I was preparing this stuff, I did put a good amount of it away before cooking it. So I've got some raw stuff in the freezer as well. Some like stems and like a lot of the outer soiled leaves. All right, the other system got 2 pieces. Those were the 2 biggest pieces. So here I'm sharing equally, I believe, by giving the remaining 2 systems 3 pieces, so kind of an equal amount for the most part. Let's top off with just a little bit more bedding. How does that sound? And then we'll start dampening things here as we return everything into the hole. Some more coffee to blend in. Let's throw a little bit more moisture in the hole though before we backfill. This stuff too, this is that somewhat dry material that was covering the top. It's been somewhat blended in already to a certain degree, and it's been combined with some damp stuff that came out of the holes. So it's not so bad anymore, but we'll help it along a little bit by giving it a nice little dampening. At the same time, we could try to get our glove rinsed off as well. Good enough. Alright, let's get the third system fed. Alright, let's see, where was it? On this side, right? The cantaloupe side and the apple side. I don't know. If we check in here maybe in another 2 weeks, I can certainly see these worms doing some damage to that apple. Or maybe the apple actually needs a month to break down. Maybe there's some sort of natural breakdown process that has to come first. But let's go get bucket number 3. Okay. Last, but hopefully not least, hopefully they're all kind of keeping up with each other. We did recently, actually during the last check-in, I think we tried to, oh, I almost forgot. Actually, I totally forgot. What we did was we cleared out what I refer to as a cocoon nursery, and this was the bin that we had chosen to put the babies into. My idea was to use all of this bedding material here, or leftover cardboard type stuff and paper, as bedding in our systems. And I'm just wondering if at this point it's easiest just to substitute all that pre-made shredded bedding that I've got with this stuff. It does seem like we've got almost the same amount here. It's just in big chunks rather than small chunks, but I don't think it really makes a whole lot of difference, right? So let's do that with this stuff. Sitting out here drying ain't gonna do anything. Using it as bedding under the feeding zone should help a lot. But really quick, I'm just curious before we dump in today's portion. Let's see how the leftovers of cantaloupe look. I would assume that we're gonna find similar leftovers here, at least the rind, because that is kind of a tougher substance, a little bit more difficult for the worms to work down. Okay, here's one piece of it. Pretty sure each system received 2 pieces of cantaloupe. One of them might have received a few smaller fragments rather than a couple large fragments. And it might also be that we're finding, I don't know, could it be that we're still finding 28-day-old leftovers as well, leftovers from the previous application of cantaloupe? Or that, no, that goes even further back. 21 and 14, 30, 35 days back. Wow. It's probably very unlikely that any of the cantaloupe leftovers we're finding are from that 35-day-old application of cantaloupe. Probably just the 14-day-old one from last time. But certainly not much, right? A couple little shreds that are definitely not going to be there next time we check in here. To me, it feels like the moisture in here is pretty decent. Not bad. So let's gather up all this bedding. Here's like a stem of a banana peel. I'm going to try to collect up all this stuff so we can drop it right down into the hole after we excavate a little bit. The only problem is that there's so little room here to work. Kind of compress it, but we'll try to fluff it up as we apply it. And at the end we'll just use a lot of that flaky stuff to cover up with overall. So down here is a lot of paper, a lot less kind of apparent casting material. Or at least that's my first impression, right? I don't know if you feel the same way. Just seemed like digging down into this end in the other 2 bins resulted in, I don't know, a handful of much darker looking stuff. No? And not only that, but here we are most certainly finding leftover apple. Our skinned apple. Wow. How do you like that? Okay. This system must have fewer worms in it than the other 2. And I think that's the reason we ended up putting additional worms in here last time, but it might not have helped that much, or at least, I don't know, that addition of worms was just a few days ago, so maybe it will help, but maybe it just needs a little bit of time. So rather than my pre-made shredded paper bedding as a foundation for today's feeding, we're dropping in not only all that residual paper, but also this piece of paper, as well as the coffee that is in it. So that should be an interesting feeding area for us to return to. At this point, whatever remains of the Savoy cabbage drops in. And, ooh, okay, a little bit of my powdered eggshell as grit, and in with these 3 chunks of apple. So, I don't know, if we have to tune our feedings to give this bin a slightly lesser portion so that they don't have to struggle to keep up, we can certainly do that. So, I don't know, I guess I wasn't so accurate when I built these bins as far as populating them goes. But I'm pretty confident that given time, the population in here will, you know, fill the void if they sense that there's a void. Let's also get that leftover apple down there too, right, with the freshly added stuff. We'll be curious to see how much of that remains next time we come in here, but I'd really like to think that they're going to gobble it up. The newly added apple will probably take them some time, but that one that's been peeled for them and has been decomposing here in this bin for how long now, I think it's high time that they did something about it and ate it already. Oh, more cardboard, yay. Alright, you know what, I'm not going to go crazy trying to include that in today's feeding. We'll stumble on it next time and we'll do our best to submerge it into the next feeding zone. Let's just sort of blend it in and it'll get dealt with later. It'll get utilized later because we got so much bedding in that feeding area, it's insane. That's okay though, I think they're going to like it. It should be interesting to see how they kind of populate and explore that pile of crumpled up cardboard and paper that we threw in there for them. It will be definitely a different bin as far as the feeding area's setup was. And it's, I guess, just a different kind of bin in terms of appearing to have a slightly smaller population, or for whatever reason a slightly slower rate at which they do away with their foods. You know, I think we've been doing a pretty good job trying to maintain consistency in our feeding. So now I should have held on to that last coffee filter, but what we'll do is we'll just allocate a nice fresh one. Tons of bedding going into here, and I don't mind. That's a good thing as far as I'm concerned. System can never do wrong with what might appear to be too much bedding. I don't think there is such a thing as too much bedding. Alright everyone, I think that's it. Good job. These bins are doing quite nicely. Maybe this one will catch up too in time. So this is system number 3. A little bit slower than the other 2, but that's okay. We'll treat the underdog as maybe the one that's going to win you more if you bet on it. How does that sound? Alright everyone, that's it for today's video. Hopefully you enjoyed it. If you did, as always, please remember to leave me a quick thumbs up before you go. And if you haven't done so already, please also consider subscribing to the channel too. That's really appreciated. Alright everyone, have a great day. Thanks for watching.